Assalamu alaikum rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Alhamdulillah, that's more like it. That Alianza Islamica was known, for its lack of support, because we had the audacity to speak for ourselves without looking for any validation or approval from anyone. And that was audacity. Being a colonized people, being in control of someone else's domination, and understanding the nature of a colonized mentality. We did not come to Islam to be spiritually colonized. Real simple. We came into Islam already having a movement orientation. In other words, for us, the vacuum was a spiritual vacuum. There was a spiritual dilemma. And when the spiritual dilemma was filled upon hearing that, hey, there is Allah, there is a power that you could tap into, and that power was Allah, which has left us left us without the spiritual malady. So we had a political idea of where we were, where we came from, and what needed to be done. And in that spirit of having accepted Islam, we understood that we want for ourselves what we want for our people. And this comes from the tradition of resistance. The tradition of struggle, because if nothing changes, nothing changes. And so that our brothers, our peers, who we went under for our training, right, our African American brothers, there's always been an affinity between the Boricuas and the African American. We come from the tradition of the 400 years of slavery. We understand that tradition well. So there was an identity. We identify with that struggle. There are similarities and there are slight differences. One may be language, another might be culture, but in essence, we share almost a common history. That commonality, right? We always promoted. We've always coexisted, and then for us, being orphans within Islam. Islam had already had generations amongst the African Americans. One of the first times I've heard of Allah or anything like this, or anything Islamic, these new words, was when I was 11 years old, and it was the 5% Nation. That was my first introduction to Allah, the word Allah. It didn't mean very much to me then, but later on in life, this Allah would appear again. So I'm not so critical as to the evolution of how Islam came about in this country. It's a history. We may like it or not like it. That's irrelevant. It is our history. So, anyway, formerly members of the Young Lords, myself, I was mostly partial working with students, high school students, Third World Student League, which is a subsidiary of the Young Lords, and so we did a lot of student organizing. And all of a sudden we get introduced to this serious Marxism, right? And this notion of being an atheist, right? And that's when the problem lies. Because we tried to parrot these lines, but we're a spiritual people. We're spiritual traditions, and so that vacuum was always there. We took the template of the Young Lords, Black Panther, with the Islam, we put that in together, and we said, now we got a program, we have an idea, right? We have a dawah. The dawah was not just inviting people to Islam per se. We didn't want that approach. First, we wanted to develop a relationship with our community, which is imperative. We also wanted to make relationships with our community because there were other progressive organizations. We were never so self-righteous that we couldn't work with other people who were not Muslim. You see, so this notion of wala wal bara and all this disassociation, everything is haram, music is haram, your clothing is haram. As a matter of fact, being Puerto Rican is haram. Right? I mean, I'm passionate about this. You know, I'm very passionate about this because you can see the level of ignorance. You know, so when we came around, we struggled, to maintain our identity. Like, in other words, I am a Muslim, or I am a Puerto Rican unapologetically who happens to be a Muslim. So I have multiple identities, and so what? Right? What, to me, how important is Islam if it doesn't have any culture? All knowledge must be culturally based. The foundation of all knowledge must have a cultural foundation. And so we understood this. So the idea of, cowing down to another people who are oppressed, right, who suffer the same politics that we suffer here in America, are going to guide us how is that possible? So our fight was actually from the Puerto Rican Muslims who had accepted Islam, who had a problem bringing it back home because they were immersed in other communities, whether it was Tabligh Jamaat, whether they just took on a different identity because they were told that you had to change even your culture. I'm a victim, in a sense, because of my ignorance, because someone told me I had to change my name. So I gave up my name, which was John Anthony Figueroa, right, and legally changed it to Yahya Abdul Latif. So when Muslims would come in, I would tell them, brother, whoever told you you have to change your name is mistaken. This is not a requirement of Deen. It's not a requirement. Of course, other people say, well, he's wrong. You have to change your name. So anyway, these are some of the struggles that we went through. One of the other issues is that how is it possible that a Puerto Rican can lead an organization? How is that possible? I mean, did he get credentialed from somewhere in the Middle East? Did someone give him approval? Does one have to validate you? When I went to Hajj, I had to be validated by someone in the Islamic Center so I can make Hajj. Because, again, we reduced to second-class citizens. So, my contribution to Alianza Islamica was that I was pretty much radical in terms of instigating, agitating, and promoting. One of the things that happened in Alianza Islamica, for instance, when people would come to Alianza Islamica, we wanted to know not much how much Islam they knew. Because when I came to Islam, it was very simple. You learn 10 little surahs, you learn how to pray and speak to your Lord, you learn about wudu, right? And you don't have to immerse yourself and waste 30 years in something that really is not going to help you. There are those amongst us who exceed, right? And this is a calling for them. But not everyone has to be a scholar. You know what I mean? The notion, the pressure that was put on people to do all this learning and study circles. A lot of these brothers died with nothing. They detached themselves from their family because they said that we couldn't participate with our family. A lot of destruction. A lot of destruction happened to us. Now, in Alianza Islamica, what we did was we looked at the community. What is the community? Well, we have a drug problem here. How are we going to address that drug problem? Well, we're going to clean it up. It's our community. It's not a ghetto. It's our neighborhood. It's our communities where we live. So we began to address that. And of course, because we were not, say, orphans and strangers in El Barrio, immediately made alliances with people that were young lords in the past. The Puerto Rican Forum, right? The Puerto Rican Congress. We started making alliances to the point that we had a problem in Rikers Island. There was a lot of slashings. This is a lot of slashings, and they wanted me to see what I can do. And it so happened I went to Lewisburg Penitentiary. I met some of the inmates in there. They were former, let's say, gang members. And when I told them the dilemma, they said, don't worry about it, this stops now. And of course, I was able to stop the riots there. People who were members of the Latin Kings, wanted to become Muslim. And I don't call them gangsters. I call them street organizations. Because why? Because I was there. I was a gangbanger. So I understand their language. So I had to take it to them in a language they understood. And as a result of that, many of those people would come to me and say, well, the only way, they asked me, why would a Latin king become a Muslim? And my answer to them is, we answer to a higher authority. It's an upgrade. And so what I did was, or we did, is we made this little kufi with the gold and black colors, and we said, here, we're going to give you this kufi, wear it. This is wisdom. We're not beating them down and, we're not judging them. We meet them where they are. But in order for you to have this relationship, you must invest time in people. This whole dawah mentality of putting tables out and giving out flyers, that's a waste of time. It's a waste of time. You have to engage the people. The people will tell you what you have to do. You don't have to tell them what to do. See, our people already know what the problem is. It is our job to be able to see the problem they have and be able to articulate it. And if we're going to use Islam, then we use to look for solutions within Islam to remedy some of their problems. Lack of education, I got you. People came in with no high school diplomas. Some of them walked away with double masters. That is, to us, is dawah. Where's the transformative power of Islam? What is this recklessness of converting people to Islam, casting to the side so they can further destroy themselves? Reckless. Now, what I've seen is a lot of cyber organizations, right? A lot of talking heads. My question to them is very simple. One, who is mentoring you? Who are you? Because you went and you acquired a piece of paper, wherever you acquired it, that qualifies you for some position in leadership? It doesn't work that way. Our tradition has always been build movements from the ground up. Not this elitist mentality, that, because you have a piece of paper that behooves you, right, to provide some sort of leadership. So in Alianza Islamica, I am who I am. I am not a scholar of Islam, but I had good sense, like anyone else, is go get some people who are qualified. We never put these people up front. So everybody said, well, this is just Yahya. Like, what the hell he knows about this deen? You know what I mean? But in the background, we had Brother Ibrahim Abdul Aziz, we had Brother Sharif Abdul Kareem. We have brothers who already not only educated Islamically, but had a little secular education. A little secular, because we talk about this time, where you have people even who have a GED maybe, and we talked about that, have a GED, and they claim to be able to understand archaic Arabic, classical Arabic. How is that possible? You haven't even mastered English. And we fall for the hokey doke. So in other words, scholarship, it's important if it's put in its right place. Fire is wrong when it's in the wrong place. Put it in the right place where it's cooking a meal, it's in the right place. So a lot of us get mesmerized, and so what we did was we demystified the notion of a scholar is an all-knower. That's dangerous thinking. So in Alianza Islamica, what we did was we took the professionals and put them where they needed to be. HIV experts, right? When people had the notion that they wanted to learn Puerto Rican history, because a lot of people didn't even know their own history, I did the most simplest thing. I went to Hunter College. I found the director of the Puerto Rican history department, and I said, listen, I'm recruiting you to give a class in Alianza Islamica, and you're not going to get paid. Right? And guess what? They said, yeah, if you ask us to do this, I'm down. Why? Because it's called social credibility. You develop social credibility. You have a credit with these people through what? Your contributions, your reputation. You know, if they needed us. For instance, another thing, there was this organization, it's called PRACA. It's one of the largest Puerto Rican organizations in America, founded by Yolanda Sanchez. Also a person who was also responsible for formulating ASPIDA, which is another Puerto Rican organization that's been on for years. I stepped up to Yolanda Sanchez and I said, Yolanda, I'm here at your service. I am a Muslim, you know, how can we collaborate? And you're okay, fine. Would you do security for the Muévete conference, which is a predominantly Puerto Rican student organization where they have this massive conference? We provided security. What's the next step? Would you give a workshop on Islam? In other words, we didn't come in demanding anything. You know, it was demanded of us. How did Islam get? Well, for instance, Ray Barreto, right, famous musician. He said, would you please educate my children about Islam? You see, this is something that's earned, right? It was natural. It was organic. It wasn't like a systemic way or cookie cutter version of Islam. You know, it's adjustable, it's flexible, it's malleable, so that you can talk the language that the people understand, right? So we had many little, the prison thing with the Latin kings. Next thing you know, they get, you know, King Tone gets caught up on the RICO Act because King Tone, I believe, was on the verge of making a radical change, right? But we continue to network with them. When we had problems in the street, like for instance, we were managing property, right, for Braca, where we were providing tutoring for the children, and we had a member, his name is Mohammed Mendez, may Allah elevate him to the highest. Wallahi, what a tremendous soldier. And him and his wife took on the duty of tutoring women who had lost their children to the system and re-enter them into this dwelling that we were asked to manage, and we managed that. Immediately we set up these teachers, they were working with their homework, they were helping them to excel. And of course, some member of the Lion King went in that building and he said he was not going to leave. And I said, look, I'm just telling you, I think, you know, no men allowed in the building, you should leave the building. So, again, making connections, I called King Tone. I said, King Tone, I got a dilemma here. I got a guy in one of my buildings that doesn't want to move out. He said, I'll be there in 10 minutes. Right? I ain't call no police, no, this is just community collaboration, community cooperation. We're helping each other, you know, and so I'm calling them to do something good for Muslims. Let's look at them as answers, as helpers, right? We believe in that. Helpers, everybody will have to be. Listen, God bless you that we have a freedom of choice. You don't have to be a Muslim. Let that be a conscious decision, something that you want to do. Don't let anyone coerce you into Islam. You know, it has to be, we have to provide convincing arguments, not because Islam says so, but a convincing argument. Why should I be a Muslim? What has it done for you? Right? So anyway, King Tone comes over. This woman is pregnant, and her boyfriend is there. And so King Tone tells him, listen, when this baby is born, you're going to be 6 feet under, as soon as the child is born. And I said, wait a minute, no, whoa. We want justice. We believe in justice. That's a little exaggerated. You know, all I want this man is to leave the building. You know? We don't need all that. Right? But this is developing a relationship with someone who has a huge following. And, you know, they have these parliaments where they get together. And I'm looking at all these 17-year-old and 16-year-old. And what I'm looking at is like, how can I get these people empowered? How could I try to provide some direction, some structure, right? I don't have a whole lot of time right? To debate with Muslims whether we should go left or right. I mean, it's a waste of time. You know, arguing issues of Aqidah. You know, listen, really? We got more important things to think about. We'll get it. We're human. We'll always be human. You know, we're a work in progress. You know, this whole idea that, you know, I have this perfect outlook on what Islam is and what it's not. Listen, all I know that I'm alive only because of Allah. I have 5 minutes, the sister says, and I'm very respectful of time. So anyway, we set up the HIV programs, substance abuse program, GED program, gang intervention program. We had the Oppressed People's Affairs, so people handled political issues. Decolonization of Puerto Rico was important. We also visited the prisons. We also set up a recovery meeting for recovering addicts, because that was plaguing our community. We had parental guidance classes that were given. We have sewing classes for sisters. I mean, you name it, and we did it. We sold verduras, we sold shoes, we did whatever we had to do to sustain ourselves, right? And I feel, oh, and I'll leave it with this. Every time I get on this microphone, right, I think about all the brothers and sisters who are no longer with us. I mean, it to me is like mind-boggling, right? The work that these people forward, it's unbelievable. I am just a little dust, you know, of Alianza Islamica. You know, I was privileged to be part of that movement, that little movement. It was a little atom, but very powerful. You know, we were there for each other. When brothers came into Islam, we didn't sit around in circles learning Islam. Listen, this brother died. Let me teach you how to wash his body. OJT. You know, this luxury about where, you know, this bourgeoisie mentality that we're going to learn Islam academically. No. This is OJT. So we tried to mentor people. People were mentored, right? We made sure that people called in every day for a status check to make sure that they were okay, right? We looked out for each other, right? We worked as a unit. And I think that for 14 years, we did this. And people are talking about replicating it, but it hasn't happened yet because they want to reinvent the wheel, right? When there's plenty work to do, all they have to do is be willing to do the work and stop theorizing. We don't need a methodology. We have something that's functional, that's viable, that's proven to work. And if people were to establish little communities in all the major cities throughout, you would see a definite transformation, and you would see the impact and influence of Islam in the Latino community. That's all I have. Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Hard to follow that up. That was quite an introduction there. If he's a dust mote, if he's, I've known him since he was 13 years old. So we're you know, we used to live across the street from me on 110th Street and Madison Avenue. And it was a long history. I mean, we were in the streets, you know, doing what people do in the streets. And then we became, we got caught up in the movement. You have to understand, I like to provide some kind of historical context here. The 60s and 70s were explosive times. And those who have lived there should remember that. I lived in probably the worst building that you could imagine. I mean, I had to walk over junkies to get over to my front door. And blood-smeared walls, I don't remember, it was a horror show. You know, ceilings falling down on people. They didn't pick up any garbage. I went years with no heat and hot water, and had to heat up. I kept my baby bassinet just to fill it up with hot water so I could take a bath. That's how bad it was. So naturally, that was a powder keg. It was ready to explode, and it did. And though we were teenagers, when the movement came calling, you know, it fired our imagination. We went with it, full speed. Me and Yahya and Ibrahim, you know, and we were only like, what, 15, 14, you know, some of us are 18, 17 years old, taking over universities, taking the first watch at Columbia, taking the first watch at City University, City College, I should say. We got caught up in that. But at the same time, it did, you know, it was a Marxist, Leninist, Maoist philosophy that was basically atheist. And we began to see that there was a spiritual vacuum there. We knew we were looking for something. Me and Yahya became 5%ers, you know, and we had everything memorized, the actual facts, the mathematics, everything I memorized everything, you know. And I went to a Kwanzaa one day, you know, during that particular time, and I looked up at a paper plate that was put on the wall. You are what you eat, spiritually, mentally, and physically. Spiritually? I hadn't thought about spirituality in a long time. And that really hit me. Not long after that, we met a brother that brought us to Islam. I had met that guy before, but he was so cryptic in the way he explained Islam. I thought he was talking about worshiping trees. But this time, he was lucid. He made more sense. And after that, we shortly became Muslim. On the same day, Yahya and I kind of joined in that way. Same day, March 10th, 1973. At the same masjid that reportedly Malcolm made us asa before he went up to the Audubon, which doesn't exist anymore. 303 125th Street. From there, we joined the Islamic Party together, which was a revolutionary organization at that particular time, which is the first place where we actually learned what it was to have disciplined Islamic movement. The Alianza Islamica didn't come out of a vacuum. It was a progression. It was a progression of an attitude of Islamic-driven movement. An Islamic-driven movement, trying to move forward, trying to make a difference in the community, trying to change the community, trying to provide services for the community in an organized, structured way, in a disciplined way. After our sojourn with the Islamic Party, then came Alianza Islamica. Alianza Islamica was unique in that when me and Yahya talked about having a center in El Barrio, we didn't want to replicate what had already existed. What already existed was, we thought, an interesting culture. Many imams took their positions almost as if they were the Khalifa of Spain. And so it was like, you know, storefront kingdoms and ghetto monarchies, and we said we're not no part of that. Me and Yahya talked about that, and we said, we are not going to have anything like that. We are not going to duplicate that. We are going to have a totally different approach. We wanted a center in El Barrio, maybe a storefront, unassuming that we could just bring people in. No royal trappings, you know, of kingship or monarchy or anything like that. We want to keep it simple. We want to keep it informal. We want to just bring people in, talk to them. You know, it's kind of an organic part of the community. And we made that decision right from the very beginning. And we were fortunate to do it in Manhattan, away from the chaos of Brooklyn or any other place like that, which we didn't want to be tied in with the politics, you know, that was going on. Our one ally was in this particular masjid, Imam Talib, right? He was the one ally, and we're glad that we had him, and we didn't have to deal with anybody else. We were able to grow on our own independently. And we wanted to make a Latino expression, just like Afro-Americans had done prior to us. But it was a barrier for Latinos because they felt they had to change their whole culture. They had to change the way they talked and acted and dressed. We're Westerners. I'm a Westerner. I am not from the East. So I am not going to pretend that I am. And people, you know, walk, they say, well, this is Sunnah, this is Sunnah. I said, Prophet ﷺ never dressed like that. Do your history. This is like an approximation or something, but it's not what he wore. He dressed like the people from his area. And we wanted to make an expression of Islam that didn't make people just go through hoops just to become Muslim. It had to be something that they could relate to. Something that my mother could relate to. My mother accepted Islam, you know, but she wouldn't have, and my father before he died, alhamdulillah, and so Yahya also, alhamdulillah. But you couldn't do that if you're going to say you have to be somebody else. We're not going to be somebody else. We are who we are. We just accept Islam. That's it. That's why when we had our Eids, they reflected who we were. We brought gongas in there. We ate our own dishes, you know? By that time, we were sick of curry. So we had to have something a little different, you know, some arroz con gandules or some pasteles or something, or something, you know? I mean, it's just a reality, you know? We had to have our own expression of what the deen was, or it wouldn't make sense to people. They would not relate to it. That was very important. And to be able to do that, you have to be a little bit of a rebel. And me and Yahya were rebels. We were rebels. You have to stand up for the people. You have to be yourself. You have to stand up for people who will not stand up for themselves.
It's okay.
Otherwise, who would speak up for them? Who would? Nobody. I remember when I was in the Islamic Party, I wanted to go to give dawah on Columbia Road. They told me, you're on your own, buddy. And you realize, yeah, we are on our own. So if we want to go out in the community and have a face that's familiar, to be able to get them to say, okay, I can relate to this and maybe I can consider becoming Muslim, there's no other choice. We have to do it. And we have to do it our way. We couldn't imitate any other model, because frankly, I didn't like the other models. I thought they sucked. And I thought we needed a whole different type of model if we were going to approach Latinos. And that's basically how we approached it, alhamdulillah. And how much time do I have? It's really important in the present day that we reevaluate how masjids are organized, how we view our leadership, how we view those people who we rely on for knowledge and what knowledge they do have. Because at times you might have a situation that needs revision. You know, I see a lot of communities in stagnation. They are not moving anywhere. And you have to ask yourself, why? Why is that? Why are we kind of, you know, stuck in a quagmire? Why are we treading water? It's not moving. Why are we losing our young? That's a big question. You know, we have failed that next generation. we have to find a whole different way of engaging people. And actually, what is Islam? If Islam is not engaging the young, we've missed something. I mean, there's a fervor that converts have when they come to the deen. If that's not transferred to the kids, we failed miserably. So, Alianza Islamica was not perfect, but it did present a totally different approach that should be examined, looked at. It could provide an example for what could possibly be. Yahya said it, an engagement with people. You know, how did I become Muslim? With a flyer? I came with a flyer because somebody came and talked to me and appealed to me. That was Alianza's approach. Very personal approach. And it was a conscious decision that we made because we felt that the previous models were not going to be adequate for us. Didn't make any sense for us. It had to be something different. And rebels do that. They break the mold. He wants to do something different, do something out of the box. And that's what basically Alianza Islamica was, something totally different and out of the box that was not going to follow any cookie cutter model that we thought was totally inadequate and inappropriate to our situation. Alhamdulillah, that's all I have to say.
I'm just going to read for you quickly what I did in my last khutbah for the brothers at Masjid al-Kawthar in Newark, New Jersey. Small, Afro-American community, very loving group of people. And what I did since I retired, I had time to go back, and I realized I had almost no relationship to the Holy Quran, none. And I think most of us need to work on that. So try to read Quran every 2 weeks, try to complete every 2 weeks. And then I realized that, as Prophet ﷺ said in his last speech on earth to the largest crowd he had, I've left with you two things. If you hold on to them, you'll never go astray. The Book of Allah and the Sunnah of his Holy Prophet. So we're going to review all the books of Sunnah, 9 major books. Let's go review those. A lot of them in English, a lot of them not. But anyway, the thing I read last week for them is from a wonderful set of hadiths called from a man named Darimi. And most of the books begin with, like Bukhari, Muslim, begin with Book of Iman or Book of how the revelation began. Darimi begins in a very strange way. He begins on what was it like in the Jahiliyyah before Islam came. What did Allah Almighty do to us by this religion He gave us? And what is the power bigger than any culture, bigger than any race, bigger than any language? What did Allah Almighty give us that shines as bright as the sun in the sky? And that's what we judge all this stuff against. A man asked the Holy Prophet ﷺ in Darimi, the first hadith, he said, will a man be judged by what, man or woman, will he be judged by what they did before Islam in Jahiliyyah? And the Holy Prophet ﷺ said, whatever is good in this, whoever is good in Islam will not be taken into account by what they did in the Jahiliyyah. But whoever does evil in Islam will be taken into account for what they did in the Jahiliyyah. Now we all know the normal hadith says everything's wiped out, but here you see Imam Darimi saying, yeah, that's true, but be careful, be careful. Then Imam Darimi says, the next hadith man, a man described how they behaved in the Jahiliyyah. And all of us have our own Jahiliyyah, our own period of ignorance before Islam. And even as Muslims, that period, you don't have no relationship to Holy Quran. You don't have no relationship. You just, I say, like when the angels come in the grave and say, what did you say about this man Muhammad? You say, oh, I say what everybody else said. That's not a good enough answer. That's not a good enough answer. So we have to say, so anyway, he said, he described how were they in the Jahiliyyah. O Prophet of Allah, in our time of ignorance, we worshipped idols and we used to kill our children. One day I took my baby daughter, so I took her with me to a well that was close to where we lived. And I flung her into that well and killed her. And I held her little hand, and her last words to me were, Baba, Baba, Father, Father, why? But it didn't stop me from flinging her to her death. To this the Holy Prophet wept profusely. And a man with us said, stop. A Sahaba said, stop, you're distressing the Prophet of Allah. To which the Prophet of Allah said to him, leave him. And he said, repeat that story for me. And the tears continued to soak down his beard onto his clothes as he listened to that cruelty. But then the Prophet of Allah said to that man, he said, Allah has overlooked the evil actions done in Jahiliyyah, but be very careful that you do good now. Another tale has it, they described the Jahiliyyah. He said, a man said, my people sent me with goods, among them butter and milk, to deliver to the idols of their gods. But I was afraid to eat from the butter because it belonged to their gods, and I put the milk and the butter down. Now a dog came along and he ate the butter and he drank the milk, and then the dog urinated on the idols. He said, and these were Isaf and Naila, the two most famous idols of Mecca that we were carrying them to. Or again, in Jahiliyyah, when a man traveled, he would take 4 stones with him. 3 he kept, 1 to worship, 1 to chase dogs away if they came, and 1 was to kill his child if he needed to on the trip. In Jahiliyyah, if we found a beautiful stone, we would worship it, and we would take it to a camel and place it between its legs, and the camel would urinate on it or put milk on it, and then that stone we would say was extra special, and we would worship it even more. That's how ignorant they were in the Jahiliyyah. In other books of hadith it comes, when you see the great in Bukhari, when you see the great Haraj come, and they say, what they didn't know, the Arab Sahaba didn't know, say, what's Haraj? And amazingly, if my memory, it's an Abyssinian word, and the Holy Prophet said, the Haraj is murder, that the murderer and the murdered don't know why they're killing. And another beautiful hadith, he says, when you see the amana gone, trustworthiness, when your word is meaningless, then expect the final hour to come. One of the things I talk with Brother Yahya and others about all the time, and I try to preach it, but I'm a popular preacher, that's what I do, I preach. And I think, and one of the things is, in our communities, ask yourself, how many of our Muslim people are your close friends? How many close friends I can count on one hand? Few. How many? One of the, he mentioned Brother Sharif Abdul Kareem, Afro-American, used to be part of his community, but we were lifelong friends. And he died, and I was his closest friend, but I always chastise myself now, why was I not a better friend to him? Why was I not a better friend? So I would also ask us, and remember, the word for Sahaba is friendship, companionship. The Prophet of Allah began his relationship with his closest companion, Abu Bakr Siddiq. And his daughter said, there was not a day before Islam or after Islam that my father did not meet with the Holy Prophet and give them salam between them. So deep friendship, loving friendship. Again, I don't find that. The loving relationship in the household between our wives and children and each other, not there. And I see all the time, and I love I'm not a Salafi. I love these kids if they say I'm following hadith. Well, we want to follow hadith more than you. But we want to follow hadith inner and outer, what it means spiritually and what it means. But from the hadith, it's so clear that if you don't have friendship and bravery and compassion and love for your people, and then you have nothing from Sunnah. What Sunnah are you talking about? And we should love Sunnah, and we should do every hadith and every Sunnah and every one we find. Let's love it more than those kids love it. But let's try to say, the great Sheikh Abdul Qadir Jilani, one of our great spiritual masters, Abdul Qadir Jilani, I'll make this the last thing, stop my preaching. Sheikh Abdul Qadir Jilani says, when you have an Islam with no spiritual inside, you're like the guy in the grocery store. He shows up at the counter, he got a big basket. He got empty egg container, empty milk container, empty juice container. His whole shopping cart is empty. There's nothing there. And so it is with Islam. If you have Sharia, but no inner, no haqiqah, no tariqah, no nothing, you got an empty cart. You get up there with your empty stuff. And so I'd ask all of us, and I'm preaching to myself more than you, let's try to reestablish our connection to Holy Quran. We all say we try to finish once in Ramadan. But like recently I was looking, if you look at this, the great Sahaba and what they did, how often should, especially, it means Arabic, but again, even if it's your English, how often should you read Quran? The great Sahaba, some of them, the normal ones, like the greatest Quran reader of all of them was a man named Ubay ibn Ka'b. And the Holy Prophet said, if you want to see Quran, take it from Ubay. He's the one to read. Our Master Ubay used to finish in 8 days, regularly. But he said there was better than me. It was Tamim Dari, and Dari used to finish in 7 days. And they said that our Khalifa Usman ibn Affan, as it comes in Tirmidhi hadith, Usman ibn Affan used to finish in 1 rak'ah of salat, entire Quran. It was a miracle. I don't think he did it every day, but it was a miracle. And it just shows that, you know, push ourselves, especially myself. Yeah, we lived our whole life in Islam. How much longer our life is like the cell phone on red. We're on red now. So how much longer we got to go? How much longer to make our connect? I like that when I try to talk. I don't want to say nothing unless it's going to be from Holy Quran or if it's in the books of Hadith. I don't want to hear. I don't want to hear what no man, this guy say, that guy. Their opinions, you know, this one, this, that. I don't care about that stuff. I have like some of these young guys said to me, "Is that Hadith a Sahih Hadith? Is that a strong Hadith?" I said, for a dumb bell like me, anything in those great old Hadith books that our masters of Hadith said, that's Sahih enough for me. And I'm not a mufti, I'm not making, but I'm so my spiritual guidance and your spiritual guidance, any word that I find in Darami or here, that's good enough for me. And yes, and so he said to them, also this young man said, well, is it Sahih? So let me ask you something, 100%? Well, when you go to the dentist or the doctor, or wherever you go, do you ask him, is that 100%? Is everything you're doing 100%? Or do you rely on that most likely it's good enough to save your health and save your teeth and do that? We do that in our practical life, so we should do it in our thing. So if I had anything to ask and try to plead with all of us, it's that we make our connection to Holy Quran, make our connection to Hadith of Blessed Prophet, that we be humble, pious, true, truthful Muslims that spend the rest of our, we lived our whole life. Let's live our life. Let's pray that Allah Almighty will take our life. Let us be resurrected in Islam, die in Islam, be resurrected close to our Prophet alayhi salam, that we drink from the Kawthar in Jannah altogether, inshallah. That Allah Almighty make us people of Holy Quran, make us people of Hadith of our Prophet sallallahu, and make us people that love and obey and be great neighbors and citizens and people that inspire people to come to Islam by our example, by our words, by our lives, and that He never let us be someone that's chasing people away from Islam by our bad behavior, our bad judgment, our lack of wisdom, our lack of insight, our egos, or whatever it is. That the Prophet in Bukhari comes one of the strongest and most beautiful hadiths in Bukhari Sharif. Imam al-Bukhari records that the Prophet ﷺ said, he said, lying about me is not like lying about it. But I think it also means when you start talking in religion and saying any old nonsense, and you're claiming that that's coming from the Prophet of Allah in Islam, that's a form of lying on the Prophet of Allah. So we should be so careful. We should learn, again, Prophet ﷺ said another hadith, he says, it's enough evil for a person that they say everything that comes to their mind. Just speaking nonsense, just claiming that this. So for all of us, and we're all weak and we all make terrible mistakes, and I'm worse than all of you. And I beg Allah Almighty that He bless whatever activities like your beautiful little masjid, that He bless us and let us, I've asked Yahya and them, nobody, I hope they listen to me. We need a special, I told our Masjid al-Kawthar, we need a special outreach to all of our second and third generation kids. Many of them are confused, or they've left Islam, or they've done anything like that. I pray that Allah Almighty will help us find a way to keep them, bring them back, whatever kind of little Islam they do, whatever they do, because the Prophet ﷺ says, whoever says La ilaha illallah will enter into Jannah. And when he was pressed on it by Abu Dhar Ghafari, he said, if he does zina, if he does adultery and steals, and on the third time Prophet said, yes, he'll be in Jannah if he says La ilaha illallah. Even if you don't like it, he will be in Jannah. So our mission just to get these kids to, if they can do that much, and then whoever build more if you can, you don't. But that's all my preaching for you today. Thank you.
I'd like to make one more comment. He was our spiritual anchor.
Please, don't bury me alive.
I'm good. Now, and the reason why I bring that up is because they used to circulate stories about Alianza Islamica that we were bringing people into Islam through music, right? Like a Pied Piper to a conga beat. Basically, that's basically what they were saying. But, you know, they tried to, you know, kind of minimize us and try to, kind of, well, basically minimize us. In other words, trying to, delegitimize us, right, excuse me, sorry. Delegitimize us by saying that that's how we were approaching Islam. We were just bringing them in with music. But I wanted to show that, you know, for the record, that we had strong spiritual anchors that were guiding Alianza Islamica all along.
We're going to segue into the question and answer session. And to do that, I'm going to first begin with answering one of the questions that you asked of us, which is, where are the children of the community, you know? And oftentimes, if you want to test the health of the community, the vitality of the community, you look to the children that they produced. And I can tell you that the children of Alianza, we are still in contact. We're still talking and playing, but most importantly, we're praying. And some of the programs that they did, feeding the community, the poor, the hungry, we see this continue, and to see so many of the children grown up now, you know, continuing this, feeding bodies and spirits. This is the answer to your question. Estamos aquí. Wait, we're here. Okay.
So I appreciate the panel and thank you all for sharing your stories and your spiritual insight and wisdom. I can't help but notice the lack of a female voice here. You want to talk about radical change at the grassroots level. Clearly, half of your population had to be female. What was that like in Alianza? If you could tell us some of the women's roles, or maybe if you could even have one of the women share what their experience was, because as profound as impactful this statement was, I would have loved to have someone I could have identified with share their story about Alianza and how it impacted them as well.
I'll take a crack at it. Alianza Islamica look at traditional values in terms of family. No, we were not feminists. Let's get this straight. Our sisters understood their place and their role. But Sister Mariam was the administrator, and brothers had to hear and take orders from her. Our sisters were public speakers, but they knew their place. They backed us up, and we backed them up, and we protected them. So this whole idea of feminism, listen, this feminism stuff is destroying our communities, destroying our families. You know, this is not our agenda. For all those who have been socialized into institutions and been taught that we have a problem with men oppressing them, it is not our issue. It might be a Caucasian issue. It might be a white woman's issue, but it's not an issue that impacts us. Our job is to try to perpetuate the ideals of what makes a family functional. You can't have two people on the top regulating, creating confusion. You know, in this constant battle. Right now, we have young sisters coming from these institutions who've been Muslim 15 years and would not marry. Would not marry. They say, you know what? I'll just stay by myself. Right? I'll just become a da'i and propagate Islam all over the world. I'll become a spokesperson for Islam, but they will not marry. They will not have children. They will not take the responsibility of being a wife. This is a sure formula for the destruction of our families.
Well, I would just say, again, in the middle here, kind of, that you, I think for our young sisters and everyone, these are very deep sociological ideas. We are in the middle of propaganda that goes on daily from the news, from here, from there, and that our Islamic identity is a different thing entirely. And that we need to preserve, protect, make a loving, that's what I said, I was going to read before, but I didn't run out of time, that we need to be sure that among the characteristics of our Holy Prophet was a loving, caring, family unit where people were, and that means that everybody has their kind of roles to play. And you know, sometimes ladies might have a big role, sometimes they don't. But I think we should be so careful. I would urge all of you. This is a vicious kind of propaganda war that is putting our ladies and men at war with each other. Just like they'll put, if they can, our black against Hispanic and this, all of that stuff, propaganda and meant to rip us apart. And we have to, that's why I say, go back to the Book of Allah Almighty. Go back to the Hadith of the Holy Prophet. You're a smart young lady, read for yourself and see. What I was going to see there before was the story of the marriage of Khadija to the Prophet of Islam, which is really founded, the marriage of Khadija to the Holy Prophet, which is foundation of Islam. And then from there, and when he came, and Darimi has that story beautifully, when he came to her, his uncle Abu Talib was saying, look, go marry this, work for her, maybe marry her, because we're uptight for money. We ain't got no money. And he said, look, go. And it was by her wealth and her reputation that really Islam got its foundation, if you think about it. It gave him the beginning, the moral support. So, you know, was she in the back or was she in the front? Was she this? But it was clear that it was that Muslim situation. So why don't we judge these? I'll be honest with you, I'm always sure people look in the news to this, to that, listen to these liars and all that stuff going on, and they just say, how much time you give to Quran or Hadith of Holy Prophet? I ain't got time for that. That's where the wisdom for us will be, not in these other things. And just be cautious, that's all be cautious. It sounds good, when people talking like that, it sounds good, but everything kind of sounds good if you listen and you don't see, is this thing destructive to our Muslim communities and our Muslim households and our Muslim children and our Muslim, it's something that needs great thought from us, great thought, and communities like ours here that, and you know, I'm not resist, but fight back in the sense that we're representing the Prophet of Allah, and we're representing the words of Allah Almighty and the Holy Quran.
In our generation, our generation, we still had basic, stable Latino families. And if we were introduced anything different during that particular time, it would create all kinds of disruption. The Islamic model and the Latino model had a lot of similarities. Actually, it came from there because that's a history of Andalusia. So there were less problems with that then. The second generation that's come after us has had a ton of problems because of the stuff he's talking about. A lot of other ideas and other men and women actually, for some reason, don't know how to act with each other, and therefore that whole thing broke down. And it's not getting any better. And that's why the phenomenon that Yahya was talking about is around and causing a lot of problems. Because now people can't not imagine that traditional Islamic model as being a working model. And that is what has to be, otherwise we're finished.
And I want to honor her question about where's the female voice. That you saw there was a lack of them. It's the female voice is where it's always been. Right here, we're on the side of them. I was there. I was a little girl, but I was there. And before, I just want to check, I checked with one of the women that was there at the beginning if she wanted to add, and she said she would be fine with me answering it. And I just want to check with the rest of the sisters that were there at the beginning, is it okay for me to answer this question briefly? Okay. So we weren't feminists there, we weren't chauvinists there. At Alianza Islamica, my experience is that we were familyists there. And that meant in the women's area, which was shared, was that it was a really rich and colorful experience, filled with like respect and energy. It was like una mezcla de Quran y Kimars y coco helado y congas. Like it was a mix of it at the Eids or what have you. And I think that that was what it was for me, and I think that was sort of the soundtrack and the rhythm that it was then, and it still carries on. Does that answer your question?
Thank you.
Okay, you're more than welcome. Alhamdulillah. It was a great question. Mikhail's asking, how can our generation and the generation behind us support builds on the foundations that you established and support the work that you've done, so that we can make you proud and make Allah happy.
Thank you. Yes.
You know, it's interesting because in Alianza Islamica, we did focus on the youth. For instance, we would take a lot of the youth to the Poconos on weekends, right? So we invested time in them. We also encouraged the brothers who were doing the hip hop, right, to continue doing the hip hop, to be able to express themselves in other communities saying, listen, this hip hop thing is haram. You know, but this is the way that the children were coming. And we're trying to take away the very thing that allows them to survive. You know, and we try to superimpose our ways on them without trying to understand, you know, what is it that they want to do? Have we provided safe space for the youth? Like spaces where they can facilitate their own programs, you know, where we don't have to be dictatorial, you know, allow them to do organic. They're more than capable of providing an agenda for themselves. But what we don't have is mentorship. There's a disconnect between the youth and the older people. You know, that's something that's gone. But we need to establish that whole mentorship. When I came to Islam, I had mentors, right? We didn't just become we just didn't become, you know, on our own. We had mentorship. For instance, you had the Dar Islam movement, right? You had MIB. These people were willing to mentor and to teach you, to help you, right? And so the youth has to bring in their agenda, right? We can discuss many things. You can have workshops, for instance, like, what does it mean to have a girlfriend in the 21st century? You know, how do we address those issues? Because the reality is going to happen. We can't pretend it doesn't exist. We have to address the issue of substance abuse amongst the youth, right? We know that there's a lot of, you know, medications that are being used. A lot of youth are overdosing. This is a concern. You know, what's driving them to substance abuse and self-destructive behaviors? You know, and how can we be supportive of one another? Where's the help for people who are struggling with those issues? You know, we're saying that they can't come to our centers and that we can't help them. We have referral services. For instance, we have the ability to, if we don't have the resources, refer them to someone else that can help. I think a lot of us right now work with Milati Islami, right, which is a substance abuse program, and a lot of people were close to that idea. But this is just some of the ideas I have. I don't have all the answers, but I think it begins by creating a safe space for yourself, and begin to have those discussions amongst yourselves. Anyway.
Your Islamic legacy. And so for young people like yourself, my suggestion would be to you, which I wish I had done much earlier, but I think you should, there are a few things, like along with all the practical stuff, try to find out where and in which of the masjids they have very professional Quran readers that you can go and sit with them and train yourself and say, I'm going to dedicate myself to learning to read the Holy Quran correctly. It's a wonderful project. Make that one of your things. I went to Mecca, Medina. Get the young guys with you in groups and take off and go, because there's no words, there's nothing we can say up here that will touch your heart in your Islam like seeing Holy Kaaba and going to Prophet's place. Nothing does that. So maybe organize those. And the other thing for you young guys, work out all this family relationship, marriage, finding appropriate little wives, trying to get these families to work, because in my opinion, what I see, it's our #1 problem among all of our young people, the breakdown. And as Brother Yahya was just saying now, I'm amazed. I hear about all these, and God bless the dawah sisters, everybody not married for 20 years. How can that be? You're called to Islam, it's family structure. So try to find out, I think, how can we make these families strong and protect our children and do, and again, all of us, we've had long histories in divorce, marriage, this, all of that stuff, but at least let's order our imams of these masjids, order them, say, hey, what you gonna do to help us work this problem out? We need to do it. We need to have those sessions where we meet and try to figure out what is the problem. Are you married now, if I could ask?
No, not yet.
Are you looking? So these are the things to do. But and working on, and like what Yahya said, working on a strong financial foundation for yourself, so that our people are prosperous. Young guys like you, and I used to give khutbah to young people, that if we don't make money to support our communities, who in the world is going to? It should be that you get out there and make our community as prosperous and rich as you humanly can. And you young men are filled with ideas and power and youth and all that. Let's do it. Let's get out there. That's what we need to do. Because without that financial background, it's very tough.
RAHIM, you have mentioned about the transition that your brothers have made in your lives, in terms of from a gang member, 5%er, Islam. Now I know personally that most Latinos, they come from strong Catholic backgrounds. And most of the parents are real stubborn when it comes to that. How did, because you also mentioned that your parents became Muslim, alhamdulillah, may Allah grant them Jannah. How did you brothers made that transition, which was the 5% nation, which was a little more extreme, from those three different phases, and how did your parents accept it as far as the Islam not being as prevalent as it was back then?
Okay, so for the viewers who are tuning in remotely, the question being directed towards Ramon is, how did you transition from your background of Catholicism into Islam in a way, and how did that impact your family and your relations?
Well, I did have a strong Catholic background. I went to Catholic grammar school, high school, and college, and I was an altar boy. I used to serve Mass at St. Cecilia's on 106th Street. The 6 o'clock Mass, actually, I would go there to I was the 6 o'clock altar boy, 6 o'clock at St. Cecilia's. There were a good amount of people there, so it was actually a more religious time. But when I became Muslim, or even through all my journeys, I was given a lot of latitude, to search. When I became Muslim, my parents were happy because I wasn't going to probably wind up a drug addict or dead. But I lived at a time when every other guy was a junkie, and it was a pandemic, and there was a lot of death around me. A lot of people were dying. And for me to come and say that I've become Muslim was greeted with relief. So even though I came from a strong Catholic background, I mean, the reality of the time was that this was good news compared to what the alternatives could have been. Alhamdulillah. My father, he basically accepted my decision, even though he was still involved in a lot of espiritismo, which was like a Puerto Rican version of Santeria, And we had some confrontations, but alhamdulillah, on his deathbed, he accepted Islam. So, and my mother, she had accepted Islam but wasn't practicing this and that. When my father died, she comes up to me and says, Papo, what do we do now? What do I do now? Basically acknowledging that I am now the male head of the household, the family. So I told her, now you practice Islam, you make your salah, you do everything as you're supposed to do. And that's what she did. Because, you know, I was the male, I was the eldest son, and you accept your responsibility. And basically she was turning it over to me, she's turning over the mantle of authority. And I just told her, this is how you're going to practice Islam from now on. You're going to be making all your salats, and you're going to be conscious of your deen. And basically that was the end of the story.
So we come into the world with a fitrah. It's about reminding that fitrah. And yes, culturally, you know, Ana Musalami casa tu casa. Right? Un dicho is a saying that we have that comes, you know, things like ojalá, you know, inshallah, right? So yeah, it is in the culture and can easily be detected. We can see the comparability between Islam, right, and the culture within the Latino community. But mind you, we're a colonized, broken people. You know, we have that thing called double consciousness. You know, we suffer from that. So it's very difficult, you know. In fact, a lot of Puerto Ricans don't even know their history. That's sad, you know. So, you know, in Alianza Islamica, this is why we call them the professor. So let's show our history, and let's show how in our history there was resistance, right? That we were resisting colonization, right? That we had slavery in Puerto Rico. You know what I mean? All the slaves, maybe the slaves that were brought into this country were a very small number. Most of them went to the Caribbean and to Brazil and Haiti. But the number they came here with, like 500,000 maybe. But most of the slaves were spread throughout the Caribbean. So we have that history. Well, we know that the slaves were also Muslims, right? Not only were they Muslims, but we're finding out they were educated Muslims. They were scholars of Islam, right? So yeah, we can reintroduce ourselves, reorient, but we need a non-Eurocentric version of our history. And I think that a lot of people are writing about the history, so I think that in time, they'll be able to see the similarities between Islam and their own culture. So the family values, you know, el padrino, la madrina, right? This is the extended version of family. Because in the Latino family, the biggest commodity, I'll cut it off with this, biggest commodity in the Latino family is relationships. Not money, right? Nothing else, but relationships. And I think that in my house, there was always a stranger sleeping in the sofa, right? So we were already involved in helping one another. So this is part of Islam, right? We are people of charity. And so you see that. Ande come uno, comen dos. Where one person eats, two people eat. Mama always put extra food on the table in case the visitor was coming. We all expected. It wasn't the selfish, hyper individualistic, you know, type of lifestyle. Anyway.
So the question was, were you aware of what was happening at local masajid, but particularly at MIB, and the work we were doing here, and if you were, did it inspire you or help it influence Alianza's movements in any way?
Without a doubt. I came in at MIB when Imam Talib was a teenager, and Imam Tawfiq, right alongside him. So I go way back. So yeah, in that tradition, the spirit of that tradition is where Alianza Islamica drew from. Imam Talib has always been a mentor to me, right? Imam Talib was my go-to guy, right? When we got into situations in the neighborhood, right? We consult, because when I first took this job on, I went to Imam Talib, listen, I'm a layman. I would take this position if you can guarantee me that you got my back. Because see, I know how to rumble. You know, I know I'm smart enough to have the right team in the right place. So this allowed me to be bold. Why? Well, you want an Islamic debate? Well, you know what? We got that for you. Let me go back here and get it. Here's the Islamic debate, right? You want to talk about HIV? Well, guess what? Here's our expert, Dr. Sunni Ahmed, right? Here we go. Here's our expert, right? So we always have experts. We knew quite well how to defer to scholarship, and everybody stood in their lane, right? And so, yeah, proactive in the community, Black Lives Matter. I mean, we've always been in fact, Palestine, political prisoners, whatever the challenges were, we took them on, you know, because Muslims have a civic duty, not just to preach theology. What is your civic duty? You know, what are you going to contribute to society? Theology? That's it? No, we weren't going to do that. We had to get our hands dirty, right, and work to help the people. And if they became Muslim, that's none of our business. Allah makes Muslims. We don't.
Okay, so the question is where do you think the disconnect in the Ummah has come from, where there was these three brothers that maybe weren't from the same family but shared the same spirit, and you were able to create Alianza, and then looking at our generation, where's this disconnect? Why haven't we necessarily been able to maybe replicate it? And how can we fix it? That is.
Yeah, no, it's well, anyway, I would attribute that to this thing called hyper-individualism, right? There's a disconnect, right, between the older generation and the younger generation. I also blame the cut and paste generation, the Google generation, as separating us even further, right? You know, yeah. You know, so these are some of the things that I can look at immediately and we can agree upon. You know, they have not worked in our best interests. You know, it's sad, but I think that to a great extent, and I don't know, but I think that's part of the fitna that we're living. We're living in certain serious critical times. You know, like we're seeing strange behaviors. You know, we see our boys becoming effeminized, you know, like with their pants drawn beneath their ankles almost. There's some strange stuff going on. You know, like I remember when we became Muslim, listen, if a sister took Shahada, she would be married within 4 days. And we're talking about kids, 17, 18, 19. You know, today it's like, it's not like that. And so I don't know, like, you know, so, I mean, it's a very complicated, and how we can solve that, listen, we're going to have to put our heads together, and we're going to have to consult one another to find out what the answers are, because I certainly don't know. I am confused. You know what I mean? Like, I don't understand the millennials. I don't understand. And now the Generation X, the Generation Z, I don't understand them. You know, there is a disconnect. You know, nobody wants to read books anymore. I mean, the younger generation, they don't want to read. You know, I have kids that are in college, they don't read. I don't understand it, right? So we're living in some strange times. So I appreciate your honesty.
So the answer is with Allah, and we'll continue to ask Him to send us guidance. We're going to close this program, and I'm going to may the blessings of His benedición, His prayer, be showered on all of us and all of those who helped found and support Alianza Islamica in the beginning, the middle, and in the continuation, especially our dear brother Ibrahim Gonzalez. May the blessings of this be multiplied many times over and showered onto him and all of us, and the children and the great-grandchildren and beyond, for Alianza Islamica and all the communities as well. Ameen.